Hello everyone. This is the 24th part of the story, Avatar in DC Universe. Chapter 72, Revelation. Aden's point of view. Vandal Savage. I spat out the words. The mastermind behind all the shit happening in the Young Justice timeline. At least anything associated with the light, that is. He was a merciless, power-hungry madman with intellect to match his ruthless nature. Savage spared me a glance, then dismissed me just as quick. It stung. I comforted myself that soon that dismissal would turn to despair as I became the light's worst nightmare. I was not going to let their selfish agenda for power claim innocent lives if I could help it. Personally, I just looked forward to smashing his face in. Oh, seems like you're more popular these days as opposed to last time, Savage. Even the younger generation knows you. Lucifer chuckled in mirth while curiously studying Savage. The other man made no comment. I got the feeling that he was desperately trying to come up with a plan to account for Lucifer's presence. Lucifer got up in a flourish and turned to Maze. Maze dear, why don't you show the boy around while I entertain our newest guest? I was about the refuse, but the look on his face brokered no room for argument. Fuck. I wanted to stay and listen. To learn how the king of hell knew Vandal Savage. Maze patted my shoulder and addressed me. Come on kid. I got better shit to do, so let's get this done with. I sighed and spared one final look at Tommy, standing beside Savage. Something was going on and I hated not having all the answers. I complied to Maze's request and followed her out of the room. The way she stalked the hallway in anger, however, comforted me that I wasn't the only one annoyed at being left out. Luckily, I threw a critical look at the sexy Lilim walking in front of me and smiled. Maybe I could get my answers to some of the questions that had been bothering me. Maze was probably the closest person to Lucifer. If anyone knew what he was planning for me, then it would definitely be her. General point of view. Vandal's face was set in stone. Serious. Fully aware of what and who he was dealing with. His memories took him back to the past, where he had first encountered this being. It was in Nazareth during the crucifixion of Christ, the Son of God. Vandal had been chasing away to gain more power for the eventual clash with Clarion once more. The Lord of Chaos had already been the cause of the sinking of Atlantis and the battle between Babylon and the creature Starro. Two kingdoms, no empires, that Vandal had largely built with his own two hands. At this point it was inevitable that the witch boy, Chaos incarnate, would be back. Savage wanted payback. And so he had journeyed from Mesopotamia to Israel, following rumors of the presence of a prophet, the first true one in a while. Others touted him as the Son of God and Savage was intrigued. Could this prophet be similar to him and his spawn? Could they have access to strange abilities granted to them through triumph over adversity just like his own rebirth? Or were they the same as the witch boy, an elemental and fundamental aspect of all that is? Savage had had no idea. Just a hope. A hope that had been ruthlessly destroyed when he came upon the crucified body of the one they called the Son of God. And Savage had been disheartened and disappointed. What is the use of your power if you cannot save yourself? He had muttered blasphemously, standing on a hill overlooking the three crosses. The weather that had been gray, violent and oppressive had instantly stilled for him. Time had stopped on that hill and Vandal had found everything frozen, unmoving. Even the droplets of rain falling down onto the ground had similarly stalled in midair. Savage had briefly thought it was Clarion. But then, the lack of chaos following the action, banished that reasoning. The witch boy would revel in the death of everyone present first and foremost. Such were his ways. Then Vandal had briefly entertained the thought of it being the man who was crucified. Looking at his awful state, however, Vandal understood that even that was incorrect. He blinked and beside him, a figure stood gazing down at the proceedings. Vandal had been momentarily shaken to his core by the aura exuded by this being. The being was draped in a white robe that hid his sculpted physique, shining in iridescent light, with two shining, white wings connected to his back. He was hovering an inch above the ground while the wings gently flapped in the air. The wings disappeared into wisps of glowing flakes, leaving behind a shimmer in the air. The godly man gently stepped foot on the ground. Vandal took a few steps backwards, eyes wide at the impossibility of such a perfect being existing. It went contrary to all that nature was, to all that he knew and had seen. He wondered what could have created such perfection. For that is what this new stranger was. Perfect. Bear witness to this absolute point in human history. The divergence of beliefs. The originality of passive violence. Where men will stop using swords to fight their battles but instead opt for words, lies and deception. Where that which was given freely will be tainted by the selfishness that is inherent in all of you. His precious children. The ones he puts before everything else. Before us. Before, my brothers and I. The God's voice, for that is what Vandal thought he was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was enchanting, sad yet fulfilled. Content with his toll. And heavy, very heavy. Vandal briefly wondered what this entity had seen. Was it as much as he had? The rise and fall of humanity. Death and life. Hate and love. Shifting paradigms that had forced him to understand that nothing ever lasts, yet everything was stuck in a cycle. A cycle that demanded humanity to adapt or disappear into the obscurity of the past. Just ruins with no discernible origin and bones with no history. There was no fighting him. No reasoning with him. No convincing him. For the first time, the immortal man, the first metahuman, was completely and utterly stumped. What are you? Vandal finally found his voice, directing his question to the handsome man. The man had smiled mysteriously, although the action packed any cheerful emotion. Savage could read that at least. A feeling of comfort came upon him. This proved the stranger was not at all alien. They could emote. Meaning Vandal could understand what they were and learn to live with them just as he had adapted to Clarion. That does not matter. For the sake of this conversation going smoothly, however, call me Lucifer. The now named stranger turned his attention fully to stare at Vandal. Vandal gulped yet again. This presence was overbearing. The light was too much. He took another step back and stopped. Any more and he would fall off the edge of the cliff. Vandal contemplated, doing so and getting his body broken just to escape this thing. You are different from your kind, Vandal Savage. Something sets you apart. I can feel how old your soul is. Its quality. A sum of all your memories, knowledge and reasoning. Valuable. Vandal got the impression that despite the complimentary nature of the statement, Lucifer was disgusted by him. Anger bloomed inside him. Just like Clarion, this figure sought to dominate him as well. To disrespect and disregard him. Typical. In all the important ways, however, you are still the same. Arrogant, prideful, set in your ways, merciless to your own kind despite the bountiful nature of creation. You have lived for so long yet have nothing to show for it. Nothing to show for the greatest gift of all. Freedom. Free will. The ability to cast away choices given to you and make your own path. To escape the chains binding the rest. It's frankly insulting. Lucifer's face had changed at that. A feeling of melancholy washed over him. Over his face. I will not ruin this day by unmaking you human, but I promise you this, the next time we meet will be your end. Vandal's heart had skipped. His mind in disarray as he thought of the unfairness of it all. He remembered the same situation happening 10 millennia ago with Clarion. Rage unlike anything he had ever felt before set his face in a grimace. He hated being a pawn. He would not be a pawn any longer. He turned to address the being and found himself alone in the hill once again. Staring down at the masses as the Son of God was dying. That gave him pause. His anger, while still burning inside him, gave him the clarity to go over Lucifer's words. He had said that Vandal had had access to the greatest gift of all. Freedom. Free will. The ability to cast away the given choices and make his own path. To escape the chains binding the rest. The rest like clarion. It all made sense now. A revelation had been made to him. The perfect example of that revelation happening in front of his eyes. Despite the Son of God possessing untold power, he was bound by fate to his own duty. He wasn't free. Not really. Despite Clarion having the capability to bring massive destruction and do what he wanted, he was bound to his inherent fundamental alignment, chaos. That would influence his every move. His every action. That meant he was also not free. Not really. And even Lucifer, the way he had spoken to Savage told him that he coveted that same spark of freedom. To exist solely for himself without being bound by anyone or anything. So Vandal stayed on that hill for 100 days, going over every one of Lucifer's words until he finally understood it all. He had risen up, with a newfound power. The power of revelation. All these beings were bound by something. It was all a matter of strategically finding out what it was and exploiting it. Vandal Savage would never be the same again. That brief talk with the second strongest being in all of existence had changed him. Chapter 73, More Revelations. Aden's Point of View. Maze led me to one of the guest rooms of the penthouse. As soon as she opened the door and walked in, I entered the room and gently closed it behind me. The dark-skinned beauty turned around and raised an eyebrow. I don't know what you think is gonna happen, kid, but I applaud your eagerness. Usually though, I like my men. She paused, giving me an once-over from top to bottom, groan. I rolled my eyes and walked to the bed to sit on it. I gestured to the lone chair near the nightstand. Maze simply crossed her hands and looked at me. Okay, here goes. I wanted to ask you a few questions. I explained. Please. I added while sighing. Seeing that she wasn't budging, I decided to change tactics because clearly politeness wasn't working. Look at me trying to appeal to a demon's good nature. Okay, how about this? I'm sure you're also curious about me as well, so I propose we trade information. Her face lit up in a little interest. A smile worked its way onto my own. Come on, Maze, I'm not asking for a lot here, just a few questions and you can choose to not answer if you don't want to. She thought it over before finally sighing. Fuck it. I can spare a few seconds. Better make it quick though, kid. Saying that, she sank into the chair, propping her hand on her cheek and crossing her legs. The kid thing is getting old. Call me Aden. I told her, getting annoyed at the way she constantly pushed my buttons. I was going to turn 18 soon anyway, so fuck the kid thing. Sure thing. Kid. I swallowed the expletives about to come out of my mouth that a kid would never utter and decided to ignore the jab for more important stuff. See, not a child. I can be mature. I was wondering, how does Lucifer know Vandal Savage? I started off. Maze shrugged her shoulders while frowning a little. No clue. You'll have to ask him that yourself. Though I sense a great deal of blood has been shed by his hands. She added, a little lost in thought. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Maze turned to stare at me with a questioning look. I hurried to explain, he's immortal. Savage has had a hand in building most notable ancient civilizations like Babylon. It's not inconceivable that during wars to conquer lands he's killed, and through 50,000 years, that sort of thing adds up. I concluded. Maze looked surprised at that. Her brows furrowed and her hands started idly playing with the daggers she had on her at all times. That might explain it. Lucifer has rarely left hell before. But on the instances he has, it was during times of great importance in the development of your species. Times when hell would be crowded by very many souls. If what you say about this Vandal Savage is true, then they might have met during one of those times. Already, I'd learned more than I thought I could have from Maze. However, there was one thing that bothered me. Hey do you think they are friends? It was a dumb question. I felt it the instant I said it, and my face started burning from embarrassment. Maze, who seemed hell-bent on making my life miserable, looked at me incredulously and started laughing. I ran a hand down my face, wishing the world would open up and swallow me. To be honest, that question was as valid as any. For starters, I knew next to nothing about this Lucifer. He wasn't anyone I was familiar with, so who knows? I knew his alignment was definitely not good. Just like 99% of all multiversal entities. You simply couldn't collar them with molarity. The same virtues and vices that apply to humans would not work for them, because just as a hurricane is not evil yet destroys, so too are conceptual beings. Understanding them would require processing abilities greater than any supercomputer humanity could ever create. Thus, I was really scared for the world if it turned out that Lucy was Vandal Savage's pal. They certainly seemed to have history, and given the fact that Savage had survived his first encounter with the fallen archangel, well, sucks for the world if my fears came true. Oh, that cracked me up, May said while making show of wiping away tears from her eyes. You didn't actually answer me. Doesn't matter how stupid the question is. I need to hear your thoughts on it, I insisted in a serious tone. Lucifer doesn't have friends, at least not in the way you're thinking of. And even if he did, it certainly wouldn't be a mortal, she replied. What do you mean he doesn't have friends? Maze sighed and leaned back in her seat. He's the devil. The king of hell. The big man's most beautiful creation. Has been ruling hell for 10 billion years. His position and power is second to only the Creator. Anyone who might want to form a close relationship with him can't, because they are fearful of his power or jealous of it. So no, Lucifer doesn't have friends. Unless you count Dream and the rest, but those don't apply in this context. I caught the tail end of the statement, but instead of pushing it and learning even more shit than I wanted, I wisely clamped down on my curiosity. There's a reason they say, ignorance is bliss. At least, Maze had assured me that Vandal Savage would not get an ally in the form of the frigging devil in his crusade to fight the Justice League. If that happened, I'm finding a way to get the fuck out of Dodge. At least the M.C.U's problems can be solved by simply nuking Thanos from his ship. My turn. Maze's voice pulled me from my thoughts, and I turned to her, waiting for the question. The Lilim smiled mischievously and leaned forward. My sight fell to her chest portion, and I swallowed before my eyes darted back up to her face. Man, that cleavage though. When are you planning to get a girlfriend? She teased. Out of all the questions I was expecting, this was not it. I had thought she would ask about the origin of my powers, or where I came from, or how I seemed to know so much, but she had completely thrown me off. That's not important. I was totally stumbling around with my words like an idiot. I thought this thing only happens in the movies. I'm Aden Strong, for fuck's sake. The Avatar, master of all the elements. I could get any girl I want. I'll get a girlfriend when I want. I took a deep breath and coughed. That's frankly none of your business, I said, keeping my voice even and level. A smirk appeared on Maze's face. Are you shy? It's all right. I have a couple of my sisters who I think would be open to. I immediately cut her off. No. For all that's holy and good, let's go back to your rude and sarcastic self. I can't bear it if you start acting matchmaker. My words set her off to another laughing fit while I rolled my eyes at her antics. All things considered, though, it wasn't so bad. I noticed that she had a cute laugh. And the way her chest jiggled as she chuckled was sinfully pleasant to see. Still a bitch though. Hey Maze, I spoke up after her peals of laughter died down. I know the task to capture Cheshire and the other two was a test, but it got me thinking. Had Lucifer chose to intervene, they would never had stood a chance. So here's my question, how powerful is the devil? All cheer escaped from Maze's face, and the vibe in the room completely changed. She leaned back and watched me as if contemplating whether to answer me or not. Michael the Demiurge has the power to bring creation out of nothing. Lucifer can shape that creation to his own whim. Creation is nothing but putty in his hands. Everything that you see around you, all this is as a result of his will. The deep well that has no ending because it does not have a beginning. Lucifer is creation and his power is unfathomable. I gulped. Shit. I'm definitely dealing with the comic version then. At least in terms of power. Didn't want to believe it, but Maze more or less confirmed it for me. The only being who can actually take him down is his twin brother Michael, and if they ever met in the battlefield, all of creation would be at risk. That means this guy has almost unrestricted power in the DC verse. I looked at the wall of the room towards where the living room was. And he's less than 20 meters away from me. General point of view. Well, take a seat then. Lucifer offered savage. The gruffer-looking man narrowed his eyes and complied. There was nothing he could do if this being chose to kill him. Sitting or standing would not make a difference. His eyes made contact with Lucifer's own and blinked. Since the boy and the woman had walked out, the whole atmosphere in the room had changed. Vandal knew that he probably wouldn't be walking out of here. That is, if he didn't have a plan. He allowed himself to spare a glance at the boy standing behind him vigilantly. Many centuries have gone past yet, you're still stuck playing puppeteer in the shadows. How wasteful. The devil commented softly. Vandal bristled in anger inside but showed no outward reaction on his face. I have protected and preserved humanity from its own fallacy and stupidity along with external threats from the stars and the mystical side as well. Some of those threats being from your own dimension. I have been their guiding light. Despite the phenomenal control over his emotions, the comment came out defensive and biting. Yet all I see is failure. The prime example being the boy sitting on a bed, the next room over and on a wider scope, the Justice League. People who are dedicated to stopping you, despite insisting you are humanity's protector and their light. Is that how you treat someone who protects you? If you truly were their guiding light, they would adore you, love you, worship you, or at the very least work with you. Yet all I see opposition. The Lightbringer pointed out while chuckling a little at the irony of the whole situation. Then he went on to say, granted, I don't know a lot about humans from this era. And frankly any little interest I had has been swiftly killed by your presence. So answer me this, Vandal Savage. Give me a good reason why I should not unmake you where you stand. Lucifer threatened. Chapter 74, Broken Trust. General point of view. All League members present and accounted for. Wonder Woman announced to the gathered hall. She had on a serious look. Almost angry, Black Canary noted to herself. Everyone was sitting around the huge Justice League table with the exception of two notable members. Black Canary glanced at the seat next to John and felt a pang of pain stab her on the chest with a red-hot spiked metal rebar. She closed her eyes and took in a deep breath. There wasn't anything she could personally do. That didn't stop her from feeling bad for Tornado and Shazam, Billy. She still couldn't believe that Batman had kept the secret of his relative young age from them. Relative meaning incredibly young. A child. It didn't matter that the boy had powers on par with their strongest members. The battlefield, the League was no place for a child. We convened this meeting to discuss a few matters of great import to the League. For starters, update on the search for Red Tornado, a League member, and Maelstrom, a member of the Black Ops team that was initially under Batman's purview. Wonder Woman's words had an effect on the rest. It was clear by reading between the lines that something was going on. She took a second to allow the commotion to settle down before continuing. The other matter is more. Wonder Woman paused and threw a surreptitious look at the stoic Dark Knight sitting next to her. Delicate, and we'll get to it shortly after we're done discussing about the continued efforts to locate both Red Tornado and Maelstrom. She finished. Batman acted as if he didn't feel the numerous eyesights locked on him. His hands were placed above the table and he sat in a straighter posture than usual. The tension between him, Wonder Woman and Superman could be felt by everyone. Finally, someone's patience ran out. "I don't see a point in keeping us in the dark, Diana. It's clear something is going on among the three of you." It was no wonder that the Flash was the one to speak up first. Batman grunted and got up, casting a wide gaze at everyone around. "We'll get to that in a bit. First, there is something I would like to propose. The reinduction of Captain Marvel into the Justice League." There was a brief silence before Green Arrow broke it. "You can't be serious." "He can't be serious, right?" Oliver looked around at the rest of the table and saw the same looks of surprise. "That is out of the question. Frankly speaking, I am still offended by the lack of trust you showed by not informing us he was a child in the first place." King Orion, popularly known as Aquaman, banged the table with his fist, leaving behind a dent on the titanium metal reinforced furniture. Batman didn't flinch from the King of Atlantis' gaze. "It wasn't my secret to tell. I evaluated that despite his age, Captain Marvel was more than capable of handling himself. As evidenced by the numerous missions he's been on with the League. He is one of the best among us. And his age should not be a problem. If anything, his unique outlook and innocence is something that the League needs." His explanation was precise and clear. "Do you even hear yourself, Batman? The audacity. What you're asking is unethical and goes against all of our protective instincts. He is a child." Aquaman was fuming. Everyone was silently watching the pair. Batman's eyes narrowed underneath the mask. "A child who carries the wisdom of Solomon. A child who we've all fought beside. If you discount him for his age, then shouldn't the same apply to Superboy, who is only a few months old? Wisdom does not equal maturity. And despite Superboy's age, he has shown to be mature enough to match the age he appears to be." Manhunter spoke up in favor of Aquaman, as most of them were. By most of them, all of them. Batman spared a glance at one of his closest friends. It was clear he didn't have John's support in this. Or anyone's for that matter. He could make note of how they couldn't see the bigger picture. Hell, he could even tell them of how unprogressive their thinking was. It was only a few centuries ago when women couldn't be allowed on the battlefield, let alone pursue other avenues and career choices, and now, the modern world had changed. Things had gotten better and career roles were not as defined by someone's gender as they used to. Batman could make a lot of fair arguments that the League would have no choice but to listen to. However, Bruce Wayne was a different matter. There had always been a clear separation between both his identities. Bruce was the billionaire playboy and Batman was the symbol of fear and deterrence. But now the circumstances had forced Bruce Wayne to intervene in the life of his other persona. Batman knew why he was advocating for Billy to return. It was guilt and regret. His failure at saving Aden. He thought that if he could at the very least help Billy, maybe those negative emotions would abate a little. His thoughts went back to Aden and he allowed himself to briefly soak in regret and guilt at how everything had turned out. Batman sighed. An action that had the others surprised. It wasn't like him to act this, exhausted. It was time to do the right thing. Time to stop himself from completely diving off the cliff. He looked around at the table. At his comrades. Those he had shed blood with. Fought with, to save the world numerous times. They deserved better. It's clear where you all stand on this issue. Very well, I respect your decision. Batman started off, his voice was missing the hard edge from before. If anything, he now sounded his usual self. Gruff, straight to the point and sardonic at times. The Flash couldn't help but feel like something was off, however. On another unrelated matter, I officially tender my resignation from the Justice League, citing some personal issues. Shock was apparent on everyone's faces. All except for Manhunter, Wonder Woman, and Superman. These three looked resigned. Everyone knew of Batman's stubbornness. Wonder Woman and Superman had both tried to convince him otherwise, but he had refused. What? Why? Why would you ever do that, Batman? Hal Jordan was speechless, as most of them were. You're not petty enough to leave just because you didn't get your way, so what is the real reason for this? Captain Atom added, crossing his hands together on his metallic chest. Black Canary shared a look with Green Arrow. Ollie had been very vocal about Batman hiding things from the League as a whole, so it was surprising for Canary to see how right he might have actually been. Settle down, please. Batman has his reasons, and it's only polite we listen without interrupting him. Superman told the rest. Batman cleared his throat and started speaking. I have broken your trust. Aden's point of view. Maze had already left an hour ago and Savage, a little over half of that. Despite wanting to listen in at Lucifer's talk with the immortal bastard, I knew I wasn't invited, and the devil is hardly someone you can eavesdrop on without him knowing. So I chose to stuck it out and look around my room. It was good, I guess. Not the best, to be honest. It lacked that exotic feel of my last one that was constructed inside a frigging cave. I had grown so used to its earthy smell, it had taken a while for me to fall asleep in the elemental dimension. Well, that, and also because the ground there was hard and I was effectively sleeping outside, but regardless, my earlier point stands. The room wasn't the best. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of options, so I wore my big boy's pants and stopped complaining. Time waits for no one, and now that Savage and I had met, I needed all the power I can get to play in the big leagues. To that effect, it was time for some training, baby. But first, I maximized the display at the edge of my sight and whistled in appreciation. Just as I had expected, my training points had gone up. In fact, they had more than doubled. With this I could finally purchase my first training partner. And this also assured me, my earlier theories about how the training points were awarded was not wrong. Combat situations. Or rather, combat situations dependent on a given mission. Training points, 55. I rose up from the bed and created a portal to the elemental dimension. Before I could purchase the Firebender soldier as an opponent, I had to bring over my clothes and other personal effects here. The way the room looked bare annoyed me. I entered the portal. General point of view. A boom tube suddenly appeared inside Lex Luthor's office at Lex Corporation. Mercy, who was standing vigilantly beside her boss as he studied something on the laptop screen, tensed a little, preparing to step in case whoever it was decided to be a problem. Stand down, Mercy, we do not treat our own that way. Lex said, while getting up from his seat. From within the purple boom tube, Vandal Savage stepped out along with Lex's newest toy. Vandal. Luthor nodded in greeting. From the way Savage's jaw was clenched and his fist tightened, however, Lex could tell something was wrong. Very wrong. I suppose the meeting didn't go as planned? Luthor stepped closer. The meeting went as planned. I informed him about our friends and their plan to conquer the Earth once they were done with the galaxy, and that the light is the only form of deterrent capable of using any means to stop the incursion. This has only bought us enough time to put our countermeasures in place. MMH. Luthor hummed and poured a glance of wine for Savage. Handing him the glass, he made contact with Savage's eyes. Then what seems to be the problem? He questioned the older man. Savage took a sip of his glass before holding up his palm, studying it in the light. This body has been rendered mortal. My immortality, taken away as price for crossing paths with him once more. Luthor's eyes widened minutely. He instantly re-evaluated the danger of this entity. For a man of science like him, the existence of the devil was something he had initially struggled to wrap his head around. He had thought the entity a charlatan, but now. Luckily, we have a countermeasure for this as well. Luthor spoke up, prompting Savage to turn his attention to him. Project Rebirth. A scene from Chapter 103. General point of view. 3 individuals stood before a bed. The individuals consisted of a bald-headed man dressed in a form-fitting tuxedo, an elderly woman with green eyes and white hair, and lastly a young girl of about 9. Olympia Savage, the daughter of Vandal Savage, placed her hands on the young girl's shoulders. Cassandra Savage, also a daughter of Savage, flinched at the contact. To allow comfort from a loved one is not weakness, Cassandra. It is a form of strength. The elderly woman chided a little. In response to her words, Cassandra sank into her half-sister's embrace and relaxed, hiding the river of tears flowing down her cheeks. Olympia stared at the little girl and smiled. Let it all out, for when the grieving is over, we have work to do. Cassandra took shuddering breaths, trying to get rid of the pain inside her chest. She'd been taken away from her mom at 4 years old, and now, 5 years later, her father was being taken away from her. Olympia rubbed circles around the young child's back while hiding her own pain well. With expert emotional control, farmed from being Vandal Savage's daughter. So although her face seemed impassive, a turmoil of emotional storm was brewing inside her. Tell me something, Luther, who is responsible for this? Father refused to say a thing before he went into the coma. Olympia asked the other person in the room. Lex's eyes ran over the feeble body of his colleague, and dare he say it, friend, and frowned. I am not liable to tell you anything your father didn't, Olympia. He started. Lex held up his hand to stop the elder woman from cutting in. But, what I can inform you is that everything is being taken care of. Project Rebirth is slated for to start when a friend of ours finishes taking care of something. Lex said. Olympia nodded, seeing as she couldn't get any more information out of the business magnate and expert supervillain. She just had to trust that her father had the ability to overcome this, just as he had overcame everything that had ever been thrown at him. Hey, Cassandra. She lightly shook the little girl. Cassandra wiped her eyes and stared up at Olympia. Did I tell you about his fight with the bear? And so she began the story of the ages. The story of how he started off. A normal man, but a god, the savior of humanity at the end of the encounter. Lex, on the other hand, listened in skeptically. Olympia had unwavering trust in Vandal's recovery. Looking down at the stick figure missing patches of hair with a respirator on his face, Lex didn't think Vandal would pull through. Vandal had told Lex the promise Lucifer had made. That the next time they met up, would be the demise of Savage. The unmaking of all he was. Lex shuddered, the devil was fucking scary. Lex would rather go up against a murderous Superman who would tear him apart with his bare hands or split him into two with his heat beams than this. Vandal Savage was losing everything. His strength, his powers, his skills, and his faculties. And that wouldn't do because Luther needed Savage alive. Many plans would fall through if Savage died. But just in case Project Rebirth failed, Lex would need to have a backup plan. A backup plan strong enough to deal with even Lucifer. This marks the end of part 24 of the story, Avatar in DC Universe. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.